My name is Catherine Wells, and I'm 43 years old. 21 years ago, I was a young woman from small-town Minnesota, carrying dreams of adventure into what I believed would be a fairy tale marriage with the man I thought was my soulmate, Lucas. He was 3 years my senior, a charming journalism student who always knew exactly what to say to make me feel like the most important person in the world, at least during those early, intoxicating months. Back then, I possessed nothing but a degree in library science and a heart overflowing with optimism. We relocated to a quaint coastal town in Maine where Lucas secured a position at the local newspaper and I became a stay-at-home wife. Not because I lacked ambition, but because Lucas took my hands in his and said earnestly, "I want you to focus on creating our perfect home while I build our future. Trust me to handle everything else." I believed him. I believed him enough to abandon the curator position I'd dreamed of since childhood, convinced that building our life together would bring me the happiness I'd always sought. Before we continue with today's story, if you're enjoying what you've heard so far, please hit that subscribe button. Every new subscriber helps me keep sharing these inspiring tales that touch your day. Thank you for your support. During the first few years, Lucas was everything I could have wanted in a husband. He surprised me with wildflowers from roadside stands every Friday evening. He would wrap his arms around my waist while I prepared dinner and whisper romantic promises like, "I'm the luckiest man alive to have you." I still vividly recall those crisp October afternoons when we would walk the rocky shoreline, collecting sea glass and planning our future with the innocent excitement of young lovers. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, Lucas's warmth began to fade. He started working later hours, speaking less, and the tenderness in his touch disappeared entirely. I rationalized it as career pressure, but after 3 years, that distance no longer felt temporary. It had become his new identity. I remember the evening when dinner was delayed because our ancient oven finally gave out. Lucas threw his briefcase onto our kitchen table and said with cutting coldness, "You can't even manage one simple meal. What exactly do you contribute to this marriage?" I stood motionless in our cramped kitchen, still clutching the oven mitt, feeling those words strike me like physical blows. That sentence shattered something inside me that I'd been desperately trying to protect. From that moment forward, the criticism and contemptuous glances became routine. He stopped asking about my day, stopped acknowledging the effort I put into maintaining our modest home. Lucas began making cruel comparisons to other women, his accomplished colleagues with their impressive careers and financial independence. "Why can't you learn something from successful wives?" he demanded during one particularly brutal argument, simply because I'd asked him to come home before midnight for once. We remained childless throughout our marriage. I used to consider it a tragedy, but gradually I began to see it as a blessing. No child should grow up in a home where love has withered into resentment and daily humiliation. Every morning, I rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, tackle the endless laundry, and scrub every corner of our small 3-bedroom house. Lucas frequently reminded me that our home was too spacious for someone who contributes nothing financially. I learned to absorb his insults in silence because every attempt to defend myself only resulted in his cold, suffocating indifference. I convinced myself that if I tried harder, sacrificed more, he might somehow transform back into the man I'd fallen in love with. But the more desperately I tried to please him, the smaller and more invisible I felt within the walls of the life I'd worked so hard to build. I existed like a ghost in our marriage, constantly questioning what I'd done wrong. Was it because I didn't earn money? Was it because I was no longer the carefree girl he'd married? The self-doubt consumed me. Then one afternoon, while scrubbing the bathroom floor on my hands and knees, Lucas walked past without acknowledging my existence and muttered dismissively, "If you're incapable of anything else, at least try to clean properly." I gripped the scrub brush until my knuckles turned white, my chest constricting with suppressed rage. I didn't break down. I didn't lash out. But something fundamental shifted inside me, a tiny seed of rebellion that I knew would eventually grow into something Lucas could never anticipate. From that pivotal moment, I began observing him with new eyes. Instead of desperately trying to win back his affection, I started documenting every suspicious detail. The way he smiled secretively at his phone. The nights he claimed to be working late but returned home smelling of expensive perfume I'd never worn. The mysterious charges appearing on our shared credit card statements. But what I discovered next would reveal that Lucas's betrayal was far more sinister than a simple affair. And the truth about my own identity would shatter everything I thought I knew about my past. Lucas had always been ambitious, at least in the beginning. He worked for the Coastal Herald, our town's modest newspaper, and constantly spoke about becoming an investigative journalist who would expose corruption and make a real difference. But his grand plans remained just that, plans. After 3 years, he quit because the editor was too conservative for real journalism. 2 years later, he left another position because his colleagues were intellectually inferior. Eventually, I stopped asking about his career disappointments. Every time he returned home with that familiar expression of defeat and announced, "I quit," I would simply press my lips together and quietly calculate how to stretch our meager savings even further. There were months when we had to sell my grandmother's jewelry to cover basic expenses. I began cutting extreme corners, replacing meat with beans and pasta, buying only discounted produce about to expire. I even started tutoring neighborhood children in reading comprehension during the evenings, though the modest income barely covered a week of groceries. Lucas never asked if I was exhausted. Never noticed that I sometimes fell asleep on our worn couch because I lacked the energy to climb the stairs to our bedroom. Last autumn, Lucas finally found steady work at a historical research firm in Portland. The salary was modest, but the position offered potential for growth if he could prove himself reliable. He seemed different, more polished, more confident. He began wearing cologne that he'd previously called pretentious and purchased an expensive watch, claiming it was necessary to make the right impression on clients. I didn't question these changes because, deep down, I still harbored hope. Hope that this job might restore his self-respect and help him remember why he'd once loved me. But instead of sharing dinner with me, Lucas began disappearing regularly. Some evenings, he claimed to be meeting with research subjects. Other nights, it was networking events or client consultations. I would sit alone at our small dining table, staring out at the lighthouse beams sweeping across the harbor, listening to the rhythmic crash of waves and counting the hours until our marriage finally crumbled completely. One evening, while arranging the handful of daisies I'd picked from our overgrown garden, one of the few activities that still brought me peace, Lucas arrived home later than usual, practically glowing with excitement. As he kicked off his shoes, he announced, "I've made contact with a fascinating interview subject named Victoria. She's an art collector with incredible stories about lost masterpieces. This could be my breakthrough piece." When I asked, "Who is Victoria?" Lucas waved dismissively. "Just a source for my article. Don't read too much into it." But I couldn't stop thinking about his response, especially after I found a receipt from an upscale wine bar downtown, a place we'd never visited together because it was far beyond our budget. I began investigating with the quiet patience of someone who had grown accustomed to being overlooked and underestimated. I tracked receipts, monitored his schedule, and noticed when he changed his phone's passcode without explanation. I didn't confide in anyone, not even my sister Sarah in Minneapolis. I felt ashamed, as if our marriage's deterioration was entirely my fault. One night, I awakened to the soft glow of Lucas's phone screen illuminating his face as he typed messages with barely contained excitement. His expression looked nothing like the man I'd married. It belonged to a stranger living a secret life I was no longer part of. I wondered if men, when they fail to achieve their professional dreams, seek validation elsewhere to feel significant again. When Lucas could no longer see himself as a successful journalist, did he need another woman to make him feel valuable? Whatever his motivations, I was too emotionally drained to continue making excuses for his behavior. Love should never make someone feel worthless every single day. That night, I retrieved a folder I'd hidden months earlier, something Lucas knew nothing about. I stared at the blank divorce papers inside, my heart heavy but no longer trembling with fear of the unknown. The documents remained unsigned and unfiled, but knowing I possessed them gave me a sense of control in a life that had become completely foreign to me. I hadn't taken action yet, but having that option helped me endure those long nights when Lucas didn't come home at all. I assumed my life would continue in that fog of uncertainty and emotional numbness until an unexpected phone call from my estranged aunt changed everything forever. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I had just finished brewing chamomile tea when my phone rang, displaying a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was elderly but sharp, carrying an urgency that immediately captured my attention. "Catherine, dear, this is your Aunt Margaret. I know we haven't spoken since your parents' funeral, but I have something crucial to tell you." I sat down heavily, my mind racing. Aunt Margaret had been my mother's older sister, but they'd had some mysterious falling out when I was a teenager. I barely remembered her. "I've been battling cancer," she continued, "and my doctors say I have perhaps 6 months remaining. Before I die, there's something about your family that you need to understand." My tea grew cold as she spoke, her words unraveling everything I thought I knew about my past. "Your mother didn't die in a car accident, Catherine. She was murdered. And the man you knew as your father wasn't your biological parent. Your real father left you something extraordinary before he disappeared, something that Lucas has been searching for." The room seemed to tilt around me. "What are you talking about?" "Your biological father was Dr. James Whitmore, a renowned art historian who specialized in recovering stolen Nazi-era artwork. Before he vanished 23 years ago, he had a collection worth over $50 million. The clues to finding it are hidden in your childhood memories, memories that were deliberately suppressed." I could barely breathe. "That's impossible. I would remember. You underwent experimental therapy as a child to help you forget the trauma of your father's disappearance. But the suppressed memories contain the key to locating the collection. And Catherine, Lucas isn't a journalist. He's a treasure hunter who married you specifically to gain access to those memories." The phone slipped from my trembling hands. Everything made sense now. Lucas's sudden interest in art history, his job at the research firm, his mysterious source named Victoria, who was probably helping him decode my past. I wasn't just a neglected wife. I was the unwitting guardian of a fortune that people were willing to kill for. And if Lucas had discovered how to unlock my suppressed memories, my life was in immediate danger. That evening, Lucas came home earlier than usual, carrying takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant, the first kind gesture he'd shown me in months. "I thought we could have a quiet dinner together," he said with a smile that now looked sinister rather than charming. "Just the two of us." As we ate, he began asking seemingly innocent questions about my childhood. "You know, I realized I've never heard much about your early years. What was your family home like? Do you remember any family trips or special places?" Each question felt like a probe, searching for the memories Aunt Margaret had warned me about. I answered carefully, pretending I still trusted him while my mind raced with plans. After dinner, Lucas excused himself for a phone call. I slipped into his study and quickly photographed documents scattered across his desk, research about memory recovery techniques, maps of storage facilities across Maine, and most chilling of all, a detailed psychological profile of me that someone had compiled. I was living with a predator who saw me as nothing more than a key to unlock a treasure vault. But what Lucas didn't know was that Aunt Margaret had given me more than just information. She'd also provided me with contact information for Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a specialist who could safely help me recover my suppressed memories and potentially save my life. The next morning, while Lucas was at his fake job, I drove 3 hours to Dr. Rodriguez's clinic in Boston. She was a kind woman in her 60s who specialized in helping trauma survivors recover lost memories. "Your Aunt Margaret was right to send you here," Dr. Rodriguez said as she reviewed my case file. The type of memory suppression you underwent as a child was experimental and potentially dangerous. But I can help you recover what was hidden. Over the next 6 hours, through a combination of hypnotherapy and guided visualization, the memories began returning in vivid, overwhelming waves. I remembered my real father, a brilliant, gentle man who spoke 4 languages and could identify any Renaissance painting at a glance. I remembered our secret games where he taught me to recognize symbols and patterns in artwork. Most importantly, I remembered the night he disappeared, when he whispered something to me in the basement of our old house just before the men in dark suits arrived. "The angels watch over the roses where the Sacred Heart rests," he had said, pressing a small golden compass into my palm. "Remember those words, Catherine. They will lead you home when you're ready." The compass, I still had it hidden in my jewelry box at home. And suddenly, I knew exactly what it meant and where it would lead me. My father had hidden the stolen art collection in the abandoned monastery outside our old hometown in Minnesota. The angels were the stone cherubs carved above the entrance. The roses referred to the rose window in the chapel. And the Sacred Heart was the altar where the most valuable pieces would be concealed. But as the memories flooded back, I also remembered something else, something that made my blood run cold. Lucas wasn't working alone. He was part of a network of treasure hunters led by a woman named Victoria Blackwood, the same art collector he'd mentioned. And they'd been systematically tracking down and eliminating anyone connected to my father's disappearance. Aunt Margaret's cancer wasn't natural. They'd been slowly poisoning her to keep her quiet. And now that I'd recovered my memories, I was next on their list. I drove back to Maine that evening, knowing it might be the last night I spent in the only home I'd known as an adult. But I also knew I finally had the power to turn the tables on Lucas and his conspirators. I had something they desperately wanted, and now I remembered exactly how to use it. The final confrontation was coming, and this time, I would be the one with all the advantages. When I arrived home that night, Lucas was waiting for me with an expression I'd never seen before, cold, calculating, and completely devoid of any pretense of love. "Where were you today, Catherine?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. I set down my purse and looked at him steadily. "I want to see a doctor about recovering some old memories." His facade cracked instantly. "You weren't supposed to remember. The treatment was supposed to be permanent." I smiled, feeling powerful for the first time in our entire marriage. "Sorry to disappoint you, but everything's coming back now, including the truth about who you really are and what you've been searching for." Lucas stood up, his hand moving toward his jacket pocket, where I now noticed the outline of a weapon. "You don't understand the forces you're dealing with, Catherine. These people don't leave loose ends." "You mean Victoria Blackwood and her treasure hunting network?" I asked casually. "The same people who murdered my mother and have been slowly poisoning my Aunt Margaret?" His eyes widened in shock that I knew so much. I continued, enjoying the fear creeping into his expression. "Here's what's going to happen, Lucas. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to lead you and your friends to exactly what you've been looking for. But not because you're threatening me, because I want them to find it." "What are you talking about?" I pulled out the golden compass my father had given me, watching Lucas's eyes lock onto it with desperate hunger. "This will lead us to the collection. But there's something you should know about my father's final gift to the world." Lucas grabbed for the compass, but I stepped back smoothly. "Dr. James Whitmore didn't just hide stolen artwork, Lucas. He created the most elaborate trap in art recovery history. The monastery contains the collection, yes, but it's also rigged with a security system designed to capture anyone who tries to steal it. Every person who enters that sacred space gets permanently recorded, photographed, and identified for law enforcement." The color drained from Lucas's face. "You're lying." "Am I? My father was a genius who knew people like you would eventually come looking. He turned his life's work into the perfect honey trap." I smiled. "So yes, I'll take you there tomorrow. And you'll finally get what you deserve." That night, Lucas made several frantic phone calls, but I'd already contacted FBI agent Sarah Chen, a specialist in art recovery who'd been investigating my father's case for over a decade. The next morning, I led Lucas and two other treasure hunters to the abandoned monastery, knowing that federal agents were already in position. As we approached the rose window I remembered from my childhood, I turned to Lucas one final time. "Before we go inside, I want you to know something. I never loved you. Even before I remembered the truth, some part of me always knew you were lying. You wasted 21 years of both our lives for nothing." Lucas's face twisted with rage, but it was too late. As soon as we stepped inside the chapel, the hidden cameras activated, federal agents emerged from concealment, and the trap my father had spent decades perfecting finally snapped shut. 6 months later, I sat in the sunroom of my new cottage in Vermont, reading about the conclusion of the largest art recovery operation in FBI history. Lucas and Victoria Blackwood's network had been completely dismantled, with dozens of arrests across 3 countries. The recovered artwork was valued at over $60 million and would be returned to museums and families across Europe who had lost treasures during World War II. As for me, I received a substantial finder's fee from several governments, but more importantly, I'd finally discovered who I really was, not Lucas's forgotten wife, but Dr. James Whitmore's daughter. A woman with her own brilliant legacy to protect and share. I now work as a consultant for museums and law enforcement agencies, helping them recover stolen cultural artifacts. My suppressed memories had become my greatest professional asset. And every evening as I tended the small garden behind my cottage, I would hold the golden compass my father had given me and whisper, "Thank you for believing I'd be strong enough to remember when it mattered most." I'd learned that some betrayals don't destroy you, they reveal who you were always meant to become. And sometimes, the people who try to steal your past end up giving you the key to reclaim your future. Lucas had thought he was hunting treasure, but what he'd actually done was awaken a treasure hunter far more skilled than he'd ever imagined, me.